Hello, my name's Tom Landers, and today is November 30th, 2017. I'm here at Salem State University speaking with Mr. John Keenan, university president, and also a descendant of Rebecca Nurse, who was executed during the Salem witch trials of 1692. So first off, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure.
So I understand you grew up in Salem, in the Gallows Hill area?
I did. My grandmother lived in the Gallows Hill area. Okay. That's the side of the family that's actually goes back to Rebecca Nurse. Okay. I grew up in North Salem, but ironically enough, spent a lot of time over at my grandparents' house and playing in those areas where the hangings took place.
All right. So can you tell me a little bit more about growing up in Salem? Sort of like what you heard about the witch trials growing up?
Yeah. Strangely enough, I will tell you, did not talk about it a lot in our family growing up. And in fact, didn't really hear about it from my grandmother until my brother and sister, I'm the youngest of three, were sort of playing in my grandmother's attic, literally, and came across some stuff that showed her ancestry and began to talk to her about them. And understood what it meant, and then talked to my father about it as well. But my grandmother was very quiet about it. But she and never really explained to us why, but never really talked about it a lot.
Oh,
what we did, as I said, she grew up on Proctor Street. If you're familiar with Salem, Gallows Hill is right down the street, and in fact, the work that Professor Baker did at Proctor's Ledge is literally right down the street from where my grandmother lived her entire married life of 50-something years. So it's odd to me that she never really talked about it a lot, and I've never really got a full answer. I should probably ask my father why that is.
Do you have any thoughts on why that might have been?
I don't. Growing up in Salem, I'm now 52. It's interesting. The whole witch trials thing didn't have the focus that it has more recently, in the last quarter century, really. I've been involved with the Salem Award Foundation, and we just celebrated our 25th anniversary. So I remember in 1992 when all that came about, but prior to that, Salem didn't really focus on it as much. We did not learn about it in the Salem Public Schools. I grew up and went to the Salem Public Schools right through Salem High. And it wasn't really talked about. And then in 1992, when they built the memorial down near the PBS 6 Museum, I think it got a little bit more focus. And my grandmother had passed by that time, so I never really had the opportunity to speak to her about it. But fortunately, I think Salem has taken this opportunity to really learn about what happened in 1692 and how can we sort of use that knowledge today in terms of social justice work, and that's part of what the Salem Award Foundation does and will continue to do.
Okay, so like, in your understanding, what exactly did happen?
It's a great question, and some people think it was a property dispute about Rebecca Nurses and the Nurse family, who owned what and what was the property line. Certainly there was, whether some of the young people were sick, either mentally or otherwise, and had these ideas that something was happening to them. It's fascinating as a trial attorney now to understand the evidence that was presented, if you want to call it evidence, spectral evidence, how that was even accepted in a court at that particular time. And really, that's after the witch trials, how we started looking at true American jurisprudence and what should be evidence and what shouldn't be evidence. And in this particular case, it was no more than a gut feeling or expectation that these people were somehow cursing these other people. So I don't have an answer for that. It's what motivated those people to say that Rebecca and the others were somehow or other performing witchcraft. It's a great question.
Fair enough.
But I guess the real unfortunate thing is the way that they carried on those trials, and certainly without due process, how the hysteria really sort of built itself up. That until they realized that this really didn't make sense anymore.
So one of the big things, and you kind of raised it mentioning 92 when everything started really catching. Today the tourism industry in Salem is a major economic factor. And, I think you could really make a strong case that just about everything in town relating to the witch trials is for profit. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So it's a great question, right? So a few years ago when they put up the Bewitched statue, downtown Salem, which next to Roger Conant is probably the second most photographed. And most people that take their picture with Roger Conant think he's a witch.
Yep.
Right in front of the Witch Museum. So, are there some places that probably have taken advantage of that? Maybe there are. But overall, I think it's a good thing that we get people to Salem and then have this discussion. And some of the museums certainly do a better job than the others in talking about it. I will tell you, my wife is the executive director of the House of Seven Gables. Mm-hmm. They wouldn't really be able to function if they didn't have the revenue that they generate in October. They do 30-40% of their business, as do, being the former state rep, hearing from people in the district, lots of businesses are relying on that September, October revenue to carry them through the difficult months of January, February, March. So there's a balance in there, and I do think overall tourism has been good for Salem because it also gave us the opportunity to bring more people here and educate them as to what really happened. And then while they're here, maybe they have a chance to have some fun too. But overall, hopefully people, and that's part of what the Witch Memorial hopes to do, and the new memorial at Proctor's Ledge, to make sure people go away understanding the seriousness of what happened at that time, and hopefully think about today in terms of how we apply due process or otherwise. I don't know how I'm going to go from here, segue from this to that, but when you think about a lot of the sexual assault accusations that are going on today, occasionally people will call that a witch hunt based on what evidence has been presented at a particular time, and some have more than others. But I think occasionally the analogy is drawn to those times back then when spectral evidence was used to accuse people of witchcraft to other things that are going on today. Ultimately, I think the overriding idea that we should come away with is the importance of due process. And again, as a lawyer, something that I fully respect. And now as president of the university as well, when we're having a hearing about a Title IX sexual assault case or someone doing racist graffiti on the baseball field, we make sure that people, the accused, get due process, and that's appropriate.
So it's a really good point you bring up, is we have had a number of cases now so far over this academic year, racial slurs, spray painted, things like that nature. And, from your position as both a university president and both from being involved in politics and as an attorney, how much of an input do you think there's like an increase? Have you seen an increase from your time being around here in Salem, and do you attribute any of that to the current sort of political situation here in the United States?
Yeah, I don't know if it's an increase. I was just having a discussion with an alumni at lunch talking about this very issue, that whether it's the last campaign and sort of the divisiveness going on down in D.C. that sort of makes people feel comfortable about being offensive or rude today, I don't know. It seems like more people are sort of crossing that line of civility, if you will. And I don't know if it's coming from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue or not, but there is sort of that coarseness, I think, in our discourse today. That would be number one. Number two, social media enables things to spread much more than they did when you were growing up or I were growing up, when these things would happen and graffiti would happen, and nobody would know about it unless you were either in that neighborhood or you heard word of mouth. Today, something happens at Salem State, in Stanford Note, right? I mean, almost instantaneously you can put something on your Snapchat or your Twitter or otherwise. So I don't know if it's an increase in incidents or that just easier to spread the word today, which makes it very challenging, quite frankly. And when I was coming to this job, one of the questions I was asked was, what's the biggest challenge before you? And I took my phone out of my pocket and I said, I think this is the biggest challenge, because social media and the speed with which you're supposed to respond to things that are happening either on your campus or otherwise, where in the past you'd pull your senior team around and say, what do we do about this? And you had a day or two to respond, and then now you have minutes or an hour at most to respond many times before people want to hear from you. So that is very challenging. So again, I don't know if there is an increase or there's just more visibility as to what is happening. And at the end of the day, I think the fact that there is more visibility is a good thing, because then that makes sure that we're responsive to that and responsible for what happens on our campus, and we have to be held accountable for the things that happen on our campus. So you should bring it to our attention. I hope it's not on the rise. You will see some statistics. ADL puts out, Anti-Defamation League puts out some statistics, say that anti-Semitism has been on the, at least acknowledged or identified instance of that have happened on campus. On this campus, I don't want to say that it has risen, but they have been higher profile.
So also you mentioned about how the different sites here, you mentioned House of Seven Gables specifically and how they engage with those trials of 1692. So the PBD Essex Museum is, they hold in trust with the state almost all the documents relating to 1692. And they have an extremely large colonial America collection. They're one of the largest research libraries in North America. They don't really talk about it. There's not really any engagement from them. They don't do any sort of public programming. You know, as you've seen working with the Award Foundation, a lot of it relies on you.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that and how they kind of stand off from all of it?
It's a great point. I'm supposed to be meeting with Dan Monroe soon, so perhaps it's something I should speak to him about. I was amazed when we went through the process. So I was city solicitor when the PBD Essex did their first expansion. We actually had to give up a street for them to do that first expansion. Mm-hmm. And remember them talking about how 90% of what they have is not on display because they don't have the room to display it. It would be wonderful to have an opportunity to talk about whether it's here on our campus or whether it's on their campus. It's very expensive to obviously store those and present those in the appropriate way, but perhaps it's a great opportunity, and we've been trying to find ways that we can connect with the PEM and partner and collaborate with them, and maybe in fact this is a way we could start that collaboration. It's a good idea. Yeah, I appreciate it.
I've heard. So I've worked for the Park Service past 2 summers here in Salem, and that's been one of the big complaints we've heard both from ourselves and a lot of other people around here. I know there's been some complaints from other historians in the area that are doing research. Right. The symposium we had over summer, Dr. Baker was pretty critical of that aspect. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and it's another opportunity, as you said, as people come to Salem, the PEM gets a lot more visitation in October as well, just because people are here. That would be a prime time for them to be able to also do something educationally about what this is all about, and why are you in Salem in October, right? Aside from Halloween, why are you really here? I think it's a great opportunity.
Yeah. So with that too, bringing up October especially, and that's really the big center for the town economically, tourism-wise. What are your thoughts on haunted happenings? It's pretty big. It really doesn't have much to do with anything in 1692, and it's our big draw. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I'm sort of a pragmatist, a practical, right? So I grew up in Salem. I've been here my entire life, and my father and grandfather worked in the leather factories, the Flint Tan, literally just now being transformed into residences down near Blubber Hollow. So when I grew up here, we had the tanneries, we had Parker Brothers, we had Osram Sylvania, we had all these manufacturing jobs. Yep. My aunt from Proctor Street worked at Parker Brothers. My dad worked at the Flint Tan. Those are all gone. Manufacturing jobs are gone one way or another for the most part. There's some that we have around, but those are mostly gone. So Salem really went through a transformation, and a lot of that started in the 1990s with the PEM deciding to do their first expansion. And things were so tough in Salem at that time that they were actually talking about pulling up stakes and possibly moving to Boston. And some of their board members wanted to do that, and some very powerful people wanted to do that, and Mayor Harrington and then Mayor Yusevich and several other people in the community really fought to keep that here. We gave them the street so that they could have the expansion, and that really has been the beginning, the catalyst of the Renaissance in Salem, which has really transformed from a largely manufacturing sort of industrial base into tourism mecca, if you will. I had the good fortune when I was at the State House and representing the city of Salem to chair the tourism committee. There are really 3 places, I shouldn't say just 3, but 3 top places people like to go when they come to Massachusetts. They love to go to Boston, obviously. They love to go to the Cape, and they love to come to Salem. And we've really, through good stewardship, as I said, I worked for Mayor Harrington and Mayor Yusevich, and now have worked with Mayor Driscoll for some 12 years in different capacities. I think our leadership is really taken what we had, and Mayor Driscoll likes to call them, and the good bones that we had in terms of the architecture, in terms of the history, in terms of being on the coast, and build that into something which is really in many ways the role model for many communities in the North Shore, and haunted happenings grew along with it. I joke, when I was a kid, Halloween was one day,
Yeah.
right? Now I'm
a whole month.
52 years old. Halloween it starts in June for the most part, right? You really start seeing
Yeah.
tourists around. And quite frankly, even as I drive around now, going home, you probably
still
do
see
it. The tour groups of 30, 40, 50 people walking around downtown Salem. So a lot of people making their livelihood as a result of it. So I know some people are bothered by the traffic in October, but personally in my household, in the House of Seven Gables wouldn't survive without it. And when you think of that or some other areas that would not, I think overall haunted happenings has been a good thing. And as well, I think in the last decade or so, there's really been an effort to make it something friendly for the residents that live here too. So we put up with a lot of traffic. You learn how to, I live in North Salem and I know how to drive home, in October, and you figure out and put up with it. But whether it's the parades or other things that they've done to make it family friendly, I have 2 young kids have walked in that parade the last decade. This was probably my last one this year because my kids are aging out. But I think they've made it so it's something that the people that live here can enjoy too, and put up with some of the aggravation of the traffic.
Right. So sort of nationally, we already kind of touched on is how there's been this at least more of a presence of intolerance. So I want to kind of bounce back to that in the sexual assault claims that are going around, and that's a pretty big ordeal at the national level right now. I mean, as both as an attorney and both being politically connected, how do you see this impacting sort of long term?
Yeah, I hope for the better. And I have a daughter, I have a wife, and I have a sister. So some of the behavior that's being described in some of these incidents is,
Yeah.
your jaw just drops, and you
Yeah.
say, who in their right mind could possibly think that sort of conduct is appropriate in any setting? So I have to say, and maybe I'm a little bit old school, but it has been astounding to me to hear some of the stuff that's going on. Not that I didn't think that it was happening, but the degree to which it has, and certainly entertainment has been part of it, and now Capitol Hill down in Washington, and even at the State House in Beacon Hill, there's been some allegations of that as well. And I would tell you, again, as a father of a daughter and a husband and a brother, we should have zero tolerance for that. Everybody should be treated respectfully, and certainly where there's a power differential in an employment situation, that's obviously even worse. But some of the conduct that these folks are being accused of, and again, we need to be careful about that, right? So accusation 40 years ago is a difficult thing to prove or disprove, and there are reasons we have statute of limitations. As a former prosecutor and defense attorney, when witnesses get old and memories fade, it's difficult to prove or disprove. So there are other ways you can try to confirm that, but we need to be careful to, again, be respectful in mind of what we're talking about here today in terms of what happened in 1692, to make sure that due process, everybody has their day in court, so to speak, whether it's real court or it's in the employment situation or otherwise, but not to shoot too quickly when someone's accused of something. Now, if there's evidence like a photograph or a tape, that's a different story. But again, the number, I do think it's a good thing. I think women and young women and girls are feeling comfortable coming forward and no longer afraid that they're either going to get blackballed in the industry, whether it's entertainment out on the West Coast, down in D.C. I think it's a good thing, and encourage my daughter always to be able to come forward. And when that whole Me Too thing went around, my wife, we had talked about it. My wife had a situation in college where someone was inappropriate, and she was able to get out of there. But if you talk to women,
It's a lot bigger problem than you really
it is.
think.
Most people will tell you one way or another that something that was not appropriate. So to be able to stand up and help hold that person accountable today, I think it's a good result.
So with that too is sort of bringing it back to 1692 and the way allegations kind of came out. Between that and then also Salem, we have 19 people executed. There's somewhere between 150, 300 people accused. A lot of the records just don't exist anymore. But we have 19 people executed for charges of witchcraft, and compared to, say, Europe, where these trials are thousands of people being executed in some cases. Why do you think that Salem has kind of become synonymous as witch city instead of some of these other places?
Yeah. You're good at this. You ask a lot of good questions.
I try.
I don't know. In some ways, to be honest with you, oftentimes I'm embarrassed by my level of ignorance of some of the things that happen in other parts of the world that I should know more about. I can't tell you how it's differentiated or otherwise. I think the important thing perhaps was our response here and how we really built our judicial system after this as a result of it. And I had the opportunity at one point to give a speech. We were doing the death penalty debate at the State House. Have you ever been in the House chamber at the State House? So there are 5 murals on the milestones to freedom on the wall of the chamber, and one of them is Judge Sewell apologizing for his role in the witchcraft trials. And part of my argument was, we can't do a death penalty today for the same reasons we shouldn't have done it back then, and that is humans make errors, right? Whether it's DNA evidence today and misinterpretations, or it was spectral evidence back in 1692. So the whole idea and the concept of evidence and jurisprudence really grew out of that, and that certainly should be something that we educate people more about. When we just did the ribbon cutting for the new court down there, that's part of what we talked about in terms of the history of Salem and how important it was. So perhaps that's the reason why it's been given more attention, because the American system of jurisprudence really evolved around it. I don't know in terms of, I'm aware of these other incidents that happen around the world, but I don't know what happened thereafter and whether they evolved the way that we did. There's that piece, and I guess also in many ways the marketing piece and the commercialization of Halloween. Halloween, second to Christmas in the holiday season in terms of expenditures and in any given year, and has really grown not only here in Salem and Massachusetts, but all across the country, and how people have really commercialized that. So, good question. Not a great answer, but it was a very good question. I wish I knew the answer.
So, kind of getting a little more personal, do you consider yourself to be a religious person?
Not really. Not really. I mean, do I have faith and do I believe in something after? I do, and I hope so. My mother has been gone since 1994. Never met her grandkids, but I do believe that she's still around and watching, and will be proud when I inaugurated as the 14th president of Salem State University on January 19th. So I do think there's something else that's going to happen. I hope there is something else that's going to happen, and think about a lot of family and friends who have already gone. I guess my religious philosophy is also sort of, again, back to pragmatism and being practical, and that is sort of the golden rule, right? Treat everybody the way you want to be treated. And if we went right back to the sexual assault, or we went back to the witch trials, none of these things really would have happened at the end of the day if that was the rule you live life by. And my household, there's 2 rules. There's try your hardest and be polite, right? I don't care.
Good rules.
Whether it's a job or whatever it is, those 2 rules will carry you a long way in life. And that, if you can call it a religious philosophy, that's sort of my philosophy in life. But I'm not overly religious, no.
Okay. So do you see sort of how much of a role do you see religion having played in 1692?
I don't know the real impetus back then. Again, as I said, there has been some speculation whether it was a land dispute way back when. I don't know how much of a role religion played in it. I really don't. I don't want to make up an answer.
No, fair enough.
It's a valid question, certainly, but I don't know the answer.
Okay. Let me see here then. So I was going to go off that, but well, how much? So your family's pretty much been connected here in the North Shore in Salem, going all the way back. How much of an impact do you think that's played in your personal and professional life?
Yeah, so I had the opportunity last year to do a tent talk down at the Witch Memorial as part of the Salem Wood Foundation, and talk about this a little bit. In some ways, I think the desire in being in public life and being a lawyer, it sort of part of that grew out of that desire to make sure that people are treated fairly and that we have due process. I've had a very fortunate public life in terms of serving as a prosecutor and then serving as the city solicitor and then serving as a state representative, and all along hoping to think that sort of living by that rule of fairness and treating people fairly, whether it was support for undocumented immigrants coming to Salem State on in-state tuition, rights for marriage equality, those sorts of things. So I like to think that's part of it. Can I tell you with certainty, from that day I know this was the reason why I did all that? I can't say it with certainty about that, but I like to believe that's part of the reason I've had the career that I have, and part of the reason that I'm here as well is to give the opportunity to be treated fairly and have an opportunity to move up. So I think it has. I would tell you, talking with my brother and sister and my dad, again, we didn't really emphasize it a lot when we were growing up, but my dad is getting aging now too, and I should have that discussion with him to hear his thoughts on it, because we have not recorded any of that. And this is a good way to prompt that, actually. I tell my father I had this discussion. I have some questions for you now too, Dad. So it has not been something that's been overemphasized in my family, but I have to say I do think it played a role in my professional career, and certainly in growing up in Salem and understanding all this discussion that's happened since 1992 especially. The first case I had, in fact, as Salem City Solicitor, was defending the city of Salem against the artists who had built the Witch Memorial, because they were suggesting we weren't taking care of it appropriately. And I did not realize back then, if you're a public entity, a city, and you accept a piece of art like that, you have a statutory responsibility actually to take care of it.
I didn't know that either.
So that was my first arbitration I had. It was literally on the job for about 3 days, and we worked it out, and as should be taken care of appropriately anyhow. And the mayor and the city has been great in terms of providing some money from the Salem Witch House revenue that enables the Salem Award Foundation to take care of the Witch Memorial too. So they do a much better job now taking care of it.
How much, because you keep mentioning your family, how much does your family sort of identify with 1692? I know you're in the Award Foundation, things like that.
Aside, my brother has been in California for 25, going on 27 years or so. My sister lives in New Hampshire now. My dad is still local. My dad lives actually over near Proctor Hill, Proctor's Ledge now. Ironically enough, we're not far from where he grew up. But not a lot of emphasis on it. Last few times the town family had a reunion. We had been invited to and attended one or two of them. My dad has as well, but have not been overly involved in it.
So you also mentioned with the Award Foundation, correct me if I'm wrong, your talk was what it means to be a descendant, correct?
Yes.
Do you mind expanding on what exactly that is?
Yeah, it's a lot of what we've talked about here, and some of the work, some of the things that I have done professionally, and again, as I referenced some of the things that we stood for in the legislature, whether it was marriage equality or the death penalty or other way, the transgender rights in the workplace, and just treating people fairly and providing due process. I think that has been a basis for my professional career. It's part of the reason I wanted to get involved in the Salem Award Foundation. So I had been a board member. Now as president, I've become the honorary co-chair with Mayor Driscoll on that as well. In a big part, we're just completing our strategic plan here at Salem State, and part of what we talk about as well is our sense of place here in the city of Salem, and the emphasis on social justice. You were involved last summer with the institute that we had, hoping we can do some more of that. But I really do think it's something that's a distinctive advantage for Salem State University being in Salem, and understanding that history and how we can use that to educate our students and other folks that are willing or wanting to come here to learn about it in an institute or otherwise, to really say this is the lessons we learned. This is how we can apply it today, whether it's anti-Semitism or racism or otherwise, to understand that social justice is important today as well.
Fair enough. I think we've actually hit on a lot of the big points I wanted to hit on. Let's see. Yeah, so, outside of what we talked about here today so far, is there anything particular that you'd like to talk about that I haven't brought up?
No, again, I think it's important, and I know some of the schools are doing a better job with it. As I mentioned, when I grew up here, we didn't really talk about it in the Salem Public Schools at all. One of the things we've been talking about, as well as we go through the strategic plan, is the idea of being civically engaged and being a good citizen, having these discussions, understanding your sense of place. So I would be hopeful now, certainly as president as well, that our students have an understanding and appreciation of this as you go through Salem State and you have the opportunity, whether you live here or you commute here, to really get an understanding of what happened here and how important it is to not forget that as you go forward in whatever profession you choose. So I think that would be the one additional thing I would add.
All right, well, I think I'm going to call that it.
Great.
I think that's everything that we need for now.
Great.
So thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it. And that's it.